Great. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I want to, first of all, thank Mrs. Khan for your kind words. Now that she's done with the introduction, I turn my recording on. But thank you very much for your kind words. That really is really very meaningful to me. And I want to thank the Stamen family also for sponsoring this morning. And I want to thank the Yell and Fuchsberger family for sponsoring as well. Thank you so much for your sponsorship, and thank you so much for coming. I want to thank my wife, my parents, my grandmother, my in-laws, my cousins who flew in from Arizona to be here for this special day, and all of you for coming. I really appreciate you coming. Thank you guys. It means very much to me. And I want to thank Precious Mrs. Kahan and Mrs. Appel, my colleagues, parents of the school, members of the community, and of course, Achrei Chaviv, my dear students. Thank you so much for coming this morning. It means a lot that all of you can be here this morning after 3 Yontif, and I really appreciate you coming. I want to begin. The source packet you have in front of you is rather thick. I'm not going to learn most of the sources inside, with the exception of a few Gemaras that I think are imperative, and maybe a pasuk or two. The majority of the sources we'll see outside. I want to begin by discussing the Chameshes Inuyim. The Mishnah tells us in source number 1 that there are 5 Yisurim on Yom Kippur. We're familiar, no doubt, with these Yisurim. The Mishnah tells us Yom Kippurim Aser ba'achila v'shtia v'rachitza v'sicha v'nilas asandal v'tash mishamita. That in addition to eating and drinking, there are 4 other inuyim. There is anointing, there is washing, there is wearing all their shoes, and there is marital relations. And the question is, what is the nature of these other inuyim? The Gemara tells us in source Ayin Daled Amud Aleph that eating and drinking themselves are an Isser Kares. That if one eats and drinks on Yom Kippur, they incur a punishment of Kares. And the question is, what about the other inuyim? So the Gemara is very clear that kares only applies to eating and drinking. It says, where do you know the other inuyim from? So the Gemara quotes a pasuk. It says Shabbaton. It says v'inisem and Shabbaton. Rashi explains, just like by Shabbos there are malachot, and then there are additional things which are asur on Shabbos, even though they're not explicitly mentioned in the Torah. So too, eating and drinking are explicitly pointed out in the Torah, but there are other inuyim which are asur as well. We know these inuyim do not have kares, and as a matter of fact, it's not even clear where they come from, or that there are 4 other inuyim. The Gemara in source number 3, on Daf Ayin Vav Amud Aleph, tells us, Hani chamish inuyim keneged mi. Where do these 5 inuyim come from? Implying that it's not clear that there are other inuyim other than eating and drinking. So the Gemara points out Psukim in Vayikra, Tezayin, Vikra Chav Gimel, Bamidbar Chav Tes, that tell us that the word V'inisem or Inui is used 5 times in describing Yom Kippurim. And as a result of the fact that the word Inui is used 5 times, the Gemara therefore derives that there are 5 different Inuyim. But the question is, what are the nature of these Inuyim? We know there's no Isser Kares, but the question is, are they Asur Midioraisa? Are they biblically forbidden, or are they only rabbinically forbidden? And that is a major machlokes Rishonim. If you look at the Be'er Halacha and the Shulchan Aruch, he quotes almost an even amount of Rishonim in both directions, a laundry list of Rishonim in both directions, which posit whether or not the other inuyim, rechitza, sicha, nilas hasandal, and tash mishamit, are asur midirabanan, or they're asur midiraisa. Now, we're not going to go through it right now, but I quoted 2 sources on the source sheet. Tosfos in source number 4 is of the opinion that the other inuyim, other than eating and drinking, are only asur midirabanan, only rabbinically forbidden. And in the Ran, in source number 5 in your source sheet, is of the opinion that they are asur midioraisa. Rather than going through all the arguments back and forth, we'll just mention 2. So Tosfos points out in the name of Rabbeinu Tam, if you look at the Mishnah, it says that the other inuyim, eating and drinking, are asur, but there are exceptions for some of the other inuyim. For example, the Mishnah in source number 1 told us, V'hamelech v'hakala yirchatzu paneihim. That a melech or a kala can wash their face. We don't have such allowances for eating and drinking. And the Mishnah tells us that a woman who just gave birth within 30 days can wear leather shoes. We don't necessarily have such allowances for eating and drinking. So says Tosfos, that is proof positive that they are only asur midirabanan, not asur d'oraisa. Another proof given by Tosfos is that if you look at the Gemara that we quote in source number 3, the Gemara doesn't say what's the source for these inuyim. The Gemara says, Hani chamishnu keneged mi. What do they correspond to? Says Tosfos, if they were asur midioraisa, if they were biblically forbidden, then the Gemara would have said, what is the source for these inuyim, not what do they correspond to. And that is some amongst many of the other reasons that Tosfos and other Rishonim believe it's midiraisa. The Ran pushes back, though. Again, we're not going to see the Ran inside, but the Ran in number 5, in a lengthy Ran, he first quotes Tosfos' opinion. He discusses and validates and invalidates Tosfos' response. And he says, first of all, the fact that the Gemara says that the only difference between the 5 inuyim, eating and drinking, versus the other 4 kares, implies that they are similar in other areas. Had they been different in terms of whether or not there is asur midiraisa versus eating and drinking, which are asur midirabanan, the Ran says you would have thought the Gemara would have said, Hani asur b'kares, these eating and drinking are asur and kares. But the other 4, these are asur and kares, but the other 4 are also different in the fact that only asur midirabanan. The fact that the Gemara doesn't make any distinction, says the Ran in source number 5, implies further that they are all asur midiraisa, because if they weren't, it would have been told that. What about the notion that you can be lenient when it comes to rechitza, or sicha or nilas sandal, and you can't be lenient when it comes to eating and drinking? Says the Ran, not a problem. As a result of the fact that those inuyim are not mentioned directly in the Torah, they're asur midiraisa, but the fact that they're not mentioned directly in the Torah allows us to be lenient in cases of great need. Whereas eating and drinking, since they're mentioned more explicitly in the Torah, those are not, we don't make any allowances for eating and drinking whatsoever. And this machlokas, the Shulchan Aruch and others seem to side with the fact that the inuyim on Yom Kippur are midirabanan, with the exception of eating and drinking. But I want to move on now to what the Gemara does next. So now that the Gemara has told us that there is no explicit source in the Torah for the other 5 inuyim, how do we know that rechitza, sicha, ni'ilas sandal, and tashmish shemitah are in fact inuyim? We know that there are 5 inuyim, but how do we know what characterizes an inui, a sense of deprivation and affliction on Yom Kippur? And the Gemara for each of them has to prove to us, based on the psukim, that the word inui, the word affliction, is used when describing these other 4 behaviors. So we're going to skip all of them, but we're going to move on to the subject of today's discussion, which is ni'ilas sandal. And again, we're not going to see the sources mainly inside, but we're just going to see a few Gemaras that I think are important. We're going to highlight lines in the Gemara that I think are important. So we're going to move on to source number 6. The Gemara is going to prove now that ni'ilas sandal is inui from David HaMelech. When David is fleeing Yerushalayim, as Avshalom's army is approaching, the Navi elsewhere had told us that this is an inui for David. Rashi quotes this under the source number 6. Rashi tells us, Lamdenu shenikras brichato shal David pnei Avshalom inui. The Navi elsewhere tells us that when David fled from Avshalom, it was an affliction for him. It was painful for him. And what do we see the Navi says when David is fleeing from Avshalom? In source number 6, Uni'ilas sandal minalan dichsiv David ala b'mala hazesim Allah uvocha v'rosh lo chafui v'holech yachaf. His head was covered and his feet were uncovered. So during this period of inui, he uncovered his feet. We see that inui and uncovering the feet are both used to describe David abscons from Avshalom when he ran away from Avshalom. However, despite the fact that we know that the ni'ilas sandal is asur on Yom Kippur, and the woman must go yachaf, he must take his shoes off on Yom Kippur, it's not clear what constitutes a shoe on Yom Kippur. What type of shoe is included in the prohibition on Yom Kippur? So if you ask most people, ask anyone in this room, what type of shoes are asur on Yom Kippur, what would almost anybody say? Shoes which are? Leather are asur. But let's go back to the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? Did the Mishnah prohibit leather shoes? What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah in source number 1 tells us, Rechitza, Vesicha, and Ilas sandal. Ilas sandal. Nowhere do you see the word or used. The word leather is not used at all to describe what's included in the Isser on Yom Kippur. So as a matter, right? Leather's not mentioned at all. All we are told is that on Yom Kippur there is a prohibition of wearing shoes. No material, no type of shoes are mentioned whatsoever. The Mishnah just says Nilas sandal. So the first question we would have to ask, and we're going to split the share into 2 parts. We're going to focus the first part on halacha, somewhat, and the second part is going to be ashkafa. There we go. All right. So the first question is, what constitutes a shoe? So I would imagine if I were to ask anybody in this room, what is a shoe, you would use the Justice Antonin Scalia definition of a shoe, which is that I know a shoe when I see it. Right? If you A shoe is a shoe. It doesn't need much definition. It come in flip-flops. It can be a sandal. It can be a boot. It can be a galosh. A shoe is a shoe. Right? Something you put on your foot is a shoe. But it's actually a very important question, because if you think about it for a minute, how do we define a shoe? The Mishnah tells us you can't wear anything on your feet. Well, how am I defining what it is that I can't wear on my feet? Is it based on the material it's made out of, in which case maybe only leather would be prohibited? Is it anything worn on the foot? A shoe, so for example, if I put a sock on my foot, that's something that I wear on my foot. And the Mishnah says Ne'ilas a sandal, that you can't, right? Wearing something on the foot is prohibited. So would a sock be prohibited? Would a slipper be prohibited? Or maybe those things which only offer a measure of protection are prohibited. Maybe a sandal, by definition, is not just anything you put on your foot, but it's something which offers protection, which is forbidden. So therefore, canvas, rubber, synthetic, Crocs, anything like that would be prohibited as well, because that's a sandal. That's something I put on my foot for protection. Is comfort a factor? What about if what I'm wearing is very uncomfortable? Or if I'm wearing synthetic shoes that are very comfortable? Is that a sandal for the purpose of our discussion today? As you can see, it's very unclear, because if we were going to try to define a shoe and try to put parameters in terms of what is usher, it would be difficult to figure out where do we begin with the discussion. So, when I told people that I was talking about Ilas Sandal, so the number one question that people asked me, not that there are any people asking me questions about this topic, were, number one, how long are you speaking for? And number two, do we have to come? But that was only family that asked those questions. Thank you, guys. But everyone else, the few people that spoke to me, the one person that spoke to me about this year, wanted to know, what about Crocs? Because people have heard rumors about Crocs, that Crocs are forbidden on Yom Kippur. So we're not going to go through Halacha L'Maaseh this year, as you can imagine. We'll just discuss the issue briefly and where it comes from, and everyone can do their own due diligence and figure out for themselves what they want to do on Yom Kippur. So there are a number of sources, aside from the discussion of Yom Kippur, which help us define what a shoe is. Where else is a shoe relevant in halacha, aside from Yom Kippur? What else? What's chalitza? Excellent. What else? What's that? Moshe Rabbeinu. We're going to get to Moshe Rabbeinu. What else? Avelos. Shabbos, it's important. If a person is wearing something on their foot that doesn't constitute a shoe or a garment, it's called a masui. It's something which you're carrying. It might be prohibited unless it's a garment, something which is wearable. So Shabbos, Yibum Chalitza, Avelos, Yom Kippur, those are areas. So we're not going to see all of the Gemaras which discuss what a shoe is, but we're going to see one Gemara. So the Gemara tells us, in source number 7, in Maseches Yevamos, the Gemara tells us that Chalza b'minal chalitzaso kashera, that if the Yavam, the man, takes off a minal, this type of shoe, the chalitza is kosher. However, on pilia, chalitzaso psula. What's on pilia? So Rashi tells us it's like a sock. So the shoe has to be removed from the foot, but something like a sock is removed from the Yavam's foot. It's not considered to be a shoe, and therefore chalitza is not performed. So then the Mishnah continues in source number 7, Besandal sheisho ekev kasher. If the shoe has a heel, it is kosher. V'she'ein lo ekev pasul. And if there's no heel, it's pasul. So from the Mishnah we learn that at least as it pertains to chalitza, it must be made of leather. Rashi points out that a minal, there's a difference between a minal and a sandal. That we're told a minal is okay because a minal is a soft leather shoe. And for reasons that the Gemara goes into, I might think that a soft leather shoe is not acceptable for chalitza. So the Mishnah tells us a soft leather shoe is acceptable. But Rashi points out that everybody agrees that a sandal, which is not like a sandal we wear, but rather it's the terminology used in the Mishnah for a thick leather shoe, says Rashi, we'll see the Mishnah Berurah says this on Yom Kippur as well, is acceptable. So leather is a shoe, but a sock is not a shoe. So the question is, how do we know leather? Right? Where do we get this from? The Mishnah tells us this, but what's the source for leather? How come the definition of a shoe is all of a sudden leather? I would imagine that other materials were used at times, especially for those who couldn't afford it, to make shoes out of other materials. So the Gemara in source number 8 tells us it's based on a pasuk which tells us, the pasuk tells us in Nevuas Yecheskel, Amar Rav Yehuda, source number 8, Amar Rav, sandal hatafor b'pishtan ein cholzen bo, that if you have a shoe which is sewn out of linen, you can't do chalitza with it. Shne'emar v'analecha tachash, that tachash, which is the leather made out of the tachash skin, an animal that was used for the Mishkan. So we're told in the Nevuah of Yecheskel, I gave you shoes of tachash. And the Gemara says, since the word na'al is used, and since the word tachash is used, it's any type of leather, not just tachash skin, but any type of leather, because the double usage of the word na'al in that pasuk teaches us tachash leather is prohibited and other leather is prohibited. So now we know, we can go through the Gemara if you want to look at it yourself in source number 8, that leather is prohibited based on that pasuk from Nevuas Yecheskel. Then the Gemara continues, Uvan pilia chalitza psula, ban pilia lav minhalhu. And the Gemara says that when a sock is not considered to be chalitza, because a sock or a slipper maybe is not considered to be a shoe. So the Gemara offers a problem from Yom Kippur. The Gemara, a few lines later, tries to make a refutation by bringing a braita which says in Yom Kippur, socks can't be worn even in the home. So the Gemara says, Ura minhu, second paragraph in source number 8, Echad minal ve'echad sandal, Echad minal ve'echad sandal, van palya lo yital behen, lo mi beis labayis, v'lo lamita lamita. When it comes to an minal, a sandal, or an alpalia, a leather shoe, or a slipper or a sock, you can't wear it inside your house on Yom Kippur, or to even go to your bedroom on Yom Kippur, which would seemingly imply there are other definitions of a shoe specifically for Yom Kippur that are not only including leather shoes. The Gemara here seems to even include socks or sandals. So the Gemara offers one suggestion, and maybe there it's because you put cloth in it to make it soft. The Gemara says that's not going to make something a shoe. Like imagine I have a shoebox, right? If I put cloth in a shoebox and put my foot in it, that doesn't make the shoebox into a shoe. So the Gemara says it can't be that just simply putting cloth inside this material makes it into a shoe. Either it's a shoe or it's not a shoe. And the Gemara therefore concludes that an palia that we're talking about here that's asur on Yom Kippur is specifically a leather slipper or a leather sock. Okay, so based on this Gemara, it would appear that the sole determinant of a shoe is what? Whether or not it is made out of leather. Because we're told that a na'al and a sandal are prohibited. And even that brisa which says an anpilia is asur, the Gemara has to clarify and tell us that even that anpilia, even that sandal is also made out of leather. So if we were to stop right here, the conclusion we would reach would be that the only thing which is prohibited on Yom Kippur would be leather shoes. The question is that true? What about other materials? Do we define shoes on Yom Kippur narrowly, based on what we define a shoe as when it comes to chalitza? Is that the definition we're going to use when it comes to a shoe on Yom Kippur? Or maybe we have to more broadly define a shoe, and even though it means a leather shoe by chalitza, maybe it means something different when it comes to Yom Kippur. What would be the major difference between chalitza and Yom Kippur in terms of defining what a shoe is? On Yom Kippur, where it's prohibited to do anything which brings us, perhaps, pleasure. Or maybe, let's rephrase that, we're required to have some measure of inui, to either inflict affliction upon ourselves or to make sure that we somewhat mitigate our comfort. So if the only prohibition would be leather, we'd have to figure out, well, why in Yom Kippur only leather? If the problem is inui, then why can't we expand it to other shoes as well? It wouldn't seem to make sense that leather is the only thing which is comfortable to the foot. The Gemara itself suggests that in the same Gemara we just quoted, that you could have an anpilia with cloth in it, which can be comfortable. It might not be a shoe, but it's certainly comfortable. So for that, we have to go to our Masechta. When I mean our Masechta, I mean Maseches Yoma. So we're going to go now to source number 9, to the discussion in Maseches Yoma, which discusses what is a shoe with regards to Yom Kippur. Okay, so here we go. Source number 9. I know you're ready. I know you're ready, but I'm not. 1 second. Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you. Okay, source number 9. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, everyone with me? Source number 9? They asked further a question. Mahu l'tzeis b'sandal shasham Yom Kippurim. Can you go out with a sandal of sha'am on Yom Kippur? Sha'am is either a reed, or the way the Aruch explains it on the side of the Gemara, it's cork. Can you go out with a cork shoe on Yom Kippur? So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nechmeni al Raglav Amar. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nechmeni stood on his feet and he said, Ani re'isi es Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi sheyatza b'sandal shasham Yom Kippurim. I saw Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nechmeni, he went out with a cork sandal on Yom Kippur. Okay, so there we go. Thumbs up for cork sandals. Let's go weiter a little bit, just to the underlined section. We're going to skip the part that's not underlined. Rabbi Yehuda nafik b'dihitani. Rabbi Yehuda went out with also some sort of reed shoe. It's like a waterside plant, a reed shoe. Okay, so reed shoes are okay, cork shoes are okay. Abaye nafik b'dehutzi. Abaye went out with palm leaves around his feet. So So cork is okay, and reeds are okay, and palms are okay. Rava nafik b'dikule. Rava went out with a grass shoe. We could add grass shoes to the list. Rabba bar Rav Huna karach sudra akrai b'nafik. Rabba bar Rav Huna went out with a handkerchief around his feet. So we know that these plant materials are okay. We know that handkerchiefs are okay. The question is, do we assume like this opinion? Why are these okay? Why might I have thought they're not okay? And is there another way to understand the Gemara? So, before we go on, before we discuss that, let's go on in the Gemara. So the Gemara brings a teaching from Shabbos to seem to contradict this. Because right now, if we were to take a pause in the Gemara, we would say, what does this imply? Anything that's a shoe, even if it's made out, as long as it's made out of material that are not leather, are okay. The determinant would be, right, those things are perfectly acceptable. But the Gemara says, Meisiv Rami Bar Chama, second paragraph in source number 9. I'm sure you're all the same sources. Meisiv Rami Bar Chama, Hakita Yotze B'kav Shalo, that an amputee can go out with his prosthetic. Now the prosthetic here, it's not really a shoe, it's not really a leg, it's some sort of wooden contraption that the amputee would put on the bottom of where their foot would have normally been. But it's not a shoe. That's the assumption we're making here. It's not necessarily a shoe. It's some sort of prosthetic device. Divi Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi Aser. And Rabbi Yossi says it's Aser. So the discussion here is Shabbos. Am I concerned that an amputee who's going out with a prosthetic on Shabbos might accidentally carry it? So even though there's a dispute when it comes to Shabbos, V'tani Allah is shavin, everybody agrees. Both Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir agree, Sha'aser l'tseispo b'Yom Kippurim, that you can't go out with this prosthetic on Yom Kippur. Wait a minute, why is this problematic? Because this prosthetic is not a shoe. And we see over here that this thing, this device, which is clear it's not a shoe if you learn the Gemara in Shabbos, and the Brisa that's quoted, this thing is usher. So if we're going to define it as shoes are okay, as long as they're not leather, then why would this prosthetic device be problematic? It seems to be we're either expanding the definition of a shoe, or we're expanding the Isser on Yom Kippur. But why else would an amputee not be allowed to go out with this? So the Gemara offers several suggestions. So Ella Amar Rava says, and we're just going to skip the back and forth the Gemara has about this device. It also offers there, perhaps it's because there's cloth in it, and it's comfortable. The Gemara rejects it for the same reason it rejected in Yevamos, because either it's a shoe or it's not a shoe. And who said having cloth to make something more comfortable makes it usher, even if it was a shoe? Why is that the definition of isser? Something which is usser. So Ella Amar Rav, the last underlined section, Liolam duchuli ama minhalu. Rava concludes that it's a minhal. So you know why the wooden contraption is usser? Because the Rava is of the opinion that it actually is a minhal. So when it comes to Shabbos, it's a debate. But everybody agrees that when it comes to Yom Kippurim, it's a minhal. So the question is, what do we do with this Gemara? Right? A wooden shoe is usher, but a shoe made out of reeds, made out of corks, made out of leaves is okay. So what would we say so far? We would conclude that now we have two definitions of an usher shoe on Yom Kippur. A leather shoe is usher. We know that because that's the assumption the Gemara is making. Everyone agrees that a sandal is a leather shoe. We know Rava says a wooden shoe is usher, but anything that's not wood and that's not leather is acceptable. And the question is that true? Is that how we're defining a shoe for Yom Kippur? Not wood, not leather, good to go. So the question is, it's not so clear. The question is, what's the Hagdara of a shoe? What defines a shoe for the purposes of Yom Kippur? So why would leather and wood be usher, but those other materials be okay? Meaning one could possibly conceive of a shoe that's equally as strong, that's made out of reeds or some other material. Do we actually follow Rava that wooden shoes are usher? Or maybe we don't follow that opinion at all, in which case we're going to go back to what we originally said, our original assumption, which is that only leather shoes are problematic. And is it really true? Does everyone agree that those other materials are okay? So we have to see, what do we do with this Gemara? And as you can imagine, it's a three-way machlokes in the Rishonim. For the sake of time, we're not going to go through the three opinions inside. However, they're summarized very nicely in source number 13. And the three opinions in the Ran, the three opinions are basically as follows. According to Rashi, he takes the Gemara's reading like we read it, Pshuto kamashma'o. Leather shoes are usher, according to Rashi, and wooden shoes are usher. Right? The Gemara in Yevamos defined a shoe as leather. Everyone agrees even when it comes to Yom Kippur. Rava tells us you can add wood to that list. Wood and leather are usher. But then there's the Baal Hamor. The Baal Hamor says, do you know why Rava said you can't go out with a wooden shoe? when he says it's a shoe, he would agree it's not really a shoe. It's a prosthetic device. Do you know why Rava prohibits a wooden prosthetic device? Because for that person, it provides protection. And therefore, says the Baal HaMaor of Ezrachia Halevi, he says that anything which provides protection is problematic. Rava just happened to be talking about a wooden shoe. But Ein Achinami, for a person who doesn't have a prosthetic device, someone who wears a normal shoe, if for them it's protective, then it would be usher as well. What do you do about the Amoraim who went out with palm branches, and went out with reeds, and went out with all kinds of things on their foot? So he says, not a problem. The Baal HaMaor says they were finicky. That was the opinion of, I don't know, who did we quote before? That was the opinion of, opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nechmani. That was the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Abaye and Rava. Yes, we quoted those opinions. We don't paskin like those opinions. Rava, the finicky rabbi, went out with palm branches. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Nechmani, the finicky rabbi, went out with reed branches. But we paskin based on the conclusion. And the conclusion is like Rava. And how is Rava defining a shoe? Anything which is protective. So we have Rashi, which says wood and leather. We have the Baal HaMaor, which says anything which provides protection is a problem. And the Baal HaMaor, by the way, would only allow, which of the ones would he allow in the Gemara quoted? Which is the only one that doesn't provide protection? What was that opinion quoted? At the end of the first paragraph, Rabba bar Rafuna, Karach Sudra Akrai Banafik. Says the Baal HaMaor, the only thing that's acceptable is a handkerchief. Right? Because other than that, it provides protection. So according, right, if you were going to ask Rabbi Bar Rafuna what you can wear in Yom Kippur, he would say you have a choice. Either a handkerchief or a sock, or that's about it, but nothing else. And then there's the opinion of the Rif, which doesn't really say it, but the Ran says it's the Rif holds, because the Rif doesn't quote anything else as being Aser. The opinion of the Rif, which is that leather is prohibited. What about Rava? Rava said a wooden shoe. So comes the Bach, and he says, you know what kind of wooden shoe we're dealing with here? We're dealing with a wooden shoe that's lined with leather. And the question the Rava had was, this wooden shoe that's lined with leather, what gives it its predominant characteristic? Is it the fact that it's a wooden shoe, or the fact that it's lined with leather? And Rava said it's usher, but only because it's lined with leather. So again, you can look at all these opinions in source number 13, but that seems to be the bottom line, is that it boils down to a three-way machlokas rishonim. Wood and leather like Rashi, anything which is protective like the Baal HaMaor of Ezrachia Halevi, or like the Rif and the Ran and the Rush, who say that only leather is prohibited, right? The opinion that most of us are familiar with. The question is, though, before we proceed, what about the Rambam? Right? We always want to know, what does the Rambam hold? So if you take a look, this is another source we'll read inside. Source 14 is the Bach, who explains Rava as meaning a shoe that had leather in it. Let's look at source number 15. So if you look at source number 15, what does the Rambam hold? So in source number 15, the Rambam says, Aser linol b'minal v'sandal afilu b'regalachas. You can't wear a prohibited shoe even on one foot, or you can't hop around in one shoe and call that inoy. Not good enough, says the Rambam. Umutar letzeis b'sandal shel sham. You can go out with a shoe made out of rush or cork, right? Some sort of reed material. B'shel gemi b'kiyotze behen, also a type of reed material. V'korech adam beged al raglav. You can tie a handkerchief to your foot. B'yotze bo. Why? So the underlined section, the Rambam adds something new. He says, "V'shahare koshi haaretz magia l'raglav umargish shehu yachav." Because when it comes to those shoes, the hardness of the earth, the koshi haaretz magia l'raglav is felt by your foot. You can feel the ground when you step down. Umargish shehu yachav, and you can feel as if you're going barefoot. Now he doesn't mention whether or not wood is prohibited or not. All he says is koshi haaretz. So we know that he's clearly not machmir like the Baal HaMaor. Right? The Rambam is clearly not machmir that anything which is protective is prohibited. Because he says you can wear a shoe made out of reeds. Right? He doesn't just quote a kerchief. He says you can wear other materials as well. But he doesn't specify whether wood in addition to leather is okay. So it's not clear if he's only forbidding those things which are not normally associated with shoe-like materials and which provide protection or not. It's not clear what the Rambam holds. The Beit Yosef, right below, in source number 16, tells us, at least when it comes to what the Rambam's position is, if it includes wood or not. If you look in source number 16, it's to underline, the Beit Yosef says, V'harambam dvar stumim. We don't know what the Rambam holds. All he does, he says, the hardness of the earth. Now, would that mean that a shoe where I can't feel the hardness of the earth, but it's made out of reeds, is not okay? Or is he saying that by definition, any shoe, as long as it's not leather and maybe possibly wood, you can assume you can feel the harness? I mean, according to the Rambam, what is it? What carries the day according to the Rambam? Is it you have to feel the koshi haaretz and those things which he mentioned which are okay? He's assuming you could feel the koshi haaretz? Or would the Rambam even say if you have a rubber shoe but you can't feel the koshi haaretz, it's a problem? Those things are only allowed because I'm assuming you can feel the koshi haaretz, but if you can't, then it's not okay. So it's not clear from the Rambam. Let's hold off on the Rambam for a second, and let's see how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. So since the Shulchan Aruch doesn't have a Rambam to go with, the Rambam is AWOL, we don't know what he holds, the Shulchan Aruch is forced to paskin like the Rif and the Rush. So what do you think the Shulchan Aruch is going to say? What did the Rif tell us? What's Asur on Yom Kippur? Only shoes made out of leather. So the Shulchan Aruch tells us in source number 17. Shulchan Aruch says, Asur linol sandal o minal shel or. You can't wear a sandal or a minal shor. And again, the Mishnah Berurah points out here what the Rashi told us in Masechtas Yavamos, that a hard leather shoe is prohibited. That's a minal. That's a sandal. A minal, which is soft leather shoe, is prohibited. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. So, if we were to stop here, that would be our conclusion. Like everyone else, like everyone assumed before they walked to this room, like I assumed before I prepared this year, right? Leather shoes or not leather shoes, and that's the only determining factor. So, however, the Mishnah Berurah says that one should endeavor to be machmir. Again, we're not passing halacha here. We're just quoting the sources. Everyone, of course, either knows the halacha or has asked the question or will ask the question. But the Mishnah Berurah says, let's not forget that that's just one das yachid. That's just one opinion in the Rishonim. And he says that there are other achronim. It's not clear if he's referring to Rabbi Zrachi Halevi or not, who was a Rishon, but he says there are other achronim who have the opinion that one should be machmir and that anything which offers too much protection should not be worn. Just the underlined section in source 18, the Mishnah Berurah says in Sifkat and Hay in source 18, V'chein yesh machmirim shel etzeis b'minal ha'asur milavadim shekor mevelek. You shouldn't wear a shoe made out of very, very thick cloth. I guess we might call it like canvas. V'asur k'minal shalanu, that is made in the same way a shoe is made. V'hu magin al ha'regel, because it protects the foot. Who is that? Who's the one who said protection is the problem? The Baal HaMa'or, Rav Zrachi Halevi. Ve'enu margish klal shu yachaf. And he even invokes the Rambam. Because if you're wearing a very thick shoe, even if it's not made out of leather, number one, it protects your foot, like the Baal HaMa'or said is problematic. And number two, you can't feel the ground, like the Rambam says is problematic. V'lo b'chal inuhu, and it is not considered to be inui. Right? Let's not forget. For Yom Kippur, it's not good enough just to define a shoe. We have to define a shoe in Yom Kippur that gives us, that at least mitigates comfort and allows for inui. Whether it has to create inui is a separate discussion, but it has to mitigate comfort, has to remove comfort, and allow for inui. Well, the fizeh hu adin klashim, which are like rubbers, shalguma of rubber, yesh lahachmir, b'nei av she'en limchos biyad hamekilin. Don't tell someone who wears it they can't, right? Don't tell someone what they're doing is wrong. Acharei shehashulchan aruch, because the Shulchan Aruch said non-leather shoes are okay. And most other achronim are mekil. Whoever is able to, should try to be machmir, and should wear slippers, right? To the best of their ability. But if you have to go outside, then we'll allow you to wear thicker shoes. But indoors, if you can avoid it, if you can be machmir, not telling you what to do, says the Mishnah Berurah, but if you can be machmir, it's acceptable. So that's the Mishnah Berurah. However, Rav Moshe Sternbach in the Moedim Izmanim, I included it in your source sheet, but it didn't come out very clear. He is of the opinion, and this is a widely quoted opinion, on page number 7. I don't know if you can read it, but at least you can see where it's found. It's, by the way, in the 6th volume of Moedim Izmanim, Siman Chavches, 28, volume 6. He's of the opinion that what the Shulchan Aruch said no longer is applicable today. Although the Mishnah Berurah presented his opinion as a Yesh Lahachmir, the Moadim Uzmanim, Rav Moshe Sternbach, who, by the way, is still alive and is, I think, in charge of the Eidach HaRedis in Yerushalayim, he's of the opinion that nowadays the Mishnah Berurah would be Me'ikar Adin. Nowadays the Mishnah Berurah would be the opinion that we should all follow. What's the reason for that? So he offers a few reasons why synthetic shoes should be problematic. Today, again, this is just his opinion. He says, number one, because the assumption the Shulchan Aruch was making was that you're not going to wear a reed shoe aside from Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. But he said that in our day and age where we wear shoes that are not made out of leather, so the I would call it a heter, but it's not really heter. I really say it's more the definition, is what he says, of a shoe, is no longer applicable because the assumption the Gemara was making was that these Amoraim went out specifically in Yom Kippur. They didn't wear these shoes normally. That's number one. Number two, he says that non-leather shoes are also quite comfortable. So even if you're going to take the definition of Inui and forget about the definition of a shoe, we certainly would call a synthetic shoe a shoe, right? My children all have synthetic shoes, right? That's because that's what they sell in Stride, right? Right? Everyone wears synthetic shoes. Forget about that. If you're going to go with the definition of a shoe as being Inui, something where you have to mitigate comfort, so it's hard to argue, says Rav Sternbach, that only leather shoes offer comfort. All shoes offer comfort. So it would appear, despite Rav Sternbach and the Modim Izmanim, that most people, I would imagine, are not machmir like Rav Sternbach, but it's important to keep in mind, if you want to know, that's an opinion which you can, which one could ask their, whoever they ask their questions to, and figure out whether or not it's machmir for Rav Sternbach or not. What about Crocs? So even if we're machmir like the Mishnah Brura, forget about Rav Sternbach for a second, but you say anything which is protective is problematic. So I guess you'd have to ask yourself, what is a Croc? Is a Croc a shoe that's worn normally around the house? Or is it a shoe that's worn normally outdoors? Because even the Mishnah Brura was talking about shoes that are worn outdoors. You should not wear outdoors unless you have to go somewhere where you need protection. So I guess the question would be to whether or not how one wears their Crocs. Are they worn as slippers, right? Because the Mishnah Brura, again, if you assume that Crocs are not protective enough to normally wear outdoors, then maybe they're not protective enough for Yom Kippur either. You really treat them as slippers in your house, and you wear them outside if need be, like a slipper. Or should we be machmir like, right? So it depends on the individual. And even if you are going to be makel on Crocs, perhaps Rav Sternbach would still be machmir, because according to his opinion, they're too comfortable. So what's the answer? So I included in there from Vas's Nais. I think this might be the first Vas's Nais source in a Yom Iyun share. A Vas's Nais article from 2009 quotes the opinion of Rav Elyashiv that he forbade Crocs, although I don't know if that's picked up, at least in America it's picked up. Rav Schachter from Yeshiva University quotes Rav Soloveitchik, who said he defined as anything with an arch. So anything with an arch, stama, he was going based on the Rambam, the Rav, that if it doesn't have an arch, you can feel the ground. And the Rav felt as long as they're canvas shoes, and I think those Chuck Taylor shoes, they don't have arches. So I'd imagine the Rav had a nice pair of Chuck Taylors, probably bright red, although I don't know. I didn't see that, never met the Rav. But I'd imagine that any shoe which is canvas without an arch, the Rav would say is okay, because again, he was more concerned with the sheet of the Rambam. So again, Rav Elyashiv forbade Crocs, but Mordechai Eliyahu apparently did not, so to each their own. I want to spend the remaining time discussing a little bit about Shkafa. That was the halacha portion of this year. Now here comes the fun part, at least for me. I don't know about for you. You're welcome to leave, get a coffee break if you want. It's okay. Won't hold it against you. Okay, so let's go. So, here we are. So, I would like to focus with the remaining time we have, which is not a lot of time, on Hashkafa. So, we saw several opinions in the Rishonim, and for the purpose of this discussion, I want to narrow down the opinions in the Rishonim in terms of what constitutes a shoe on Yom Kippur to three possible definitions. Number one is that a shoe cannot offer too much protection. That was the Baal HaMa'or. That was possibly Rashi, who says wood and leather are problematic. We're not really sure why, but possibly because it's too protective, and possibly the Rambam. So protection is a problem with shoes. That's criteria number one for what defines a shoe, which is Yom Kippur. Is it too protective, or does it allow for some, the ability to get hurt a little bit? The second opinion was the opinion of the Rambam, who again, we said we're not sure what the Rambam holds in terms of defining a shoe absolutely, because nobody holds in terms of wood and leather. But the Rambam used that very striking lashon of sharei koshia aretz magia l'raglav. You have to feel the hardness of the ground on your foot, right? So forget about the protection for a second. Even if it was protective enough, if you can't feel the ground, it's problematic. And then there's the issur of leather itself. Why is leather all of a sudden something that we're concerned about? So we're going to start with the first answer, protection. So, as was pointed out by Mrs. Blackstein and by others in the room, right, the most famous example of an individual who took off their shoes was, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu. And me in my classroom. But the second most famous individual was Moshe Rabbeinu. So, the Psukim say in source number 19, it says that when Moshe, we're not going to read through all of Psukim again because we're short on time, there's a Moshe hayaroet zone. And we know what does Moshe see when he's out shepherding Yisro's sheep in source number 19. So, of course, he says, Moshe sees the sneh, right? V'hinei hasneh boer be'esh, and the pasuk beis, v'hasneh enenu ukal. The thorn bush is on fire, but it's not being consumed. It says in the pasuk that Hashem says to Moshe, or the Malach says to Moshe, whoever's speaking to Moshe in this pasuk, Vayomer, Al tikrov halom, shal na'alecha mi'al reglecha, ki hamakom asher ata omeid alav admas kodeshu. Don't come any further. Take your shoes off your feet, because the place which you are standing is holy ground. Right? By Yeshua, there's a similar pasuk, but it doesn't say na'alech, it says na'alech, your shoe. Discussion why by Yeshua it says your one shoe, and Moshe says two shoes. We're going to focus exclusively on the pasuk by Moshe Rabbeinu. So there's a question on this pasuk. There seems to be an inherent contradiction in the pasuk, Parak Gimel pasuk Hey. Was this sneh itself the holy ground, which Moshe was told, remove your shoes? Or is the ground before this sneh holy ground? In which case Moshe has to remove his shoes because he's standing on holy ground already. Right? What's the contradiction in the pasuk? It says, Al tikrov halom. Right? What does Al tikrov halom mean? Don't come any closer. It implies that the Kedusha is at a distance, right? Al tikrov halom. Don't come any closer, Moshe Rabbeinu, right? The Malach or Hashem is speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu, because if you come closer, right, you're going to be in violation, or it's going to be problematic, or it's not right. But then it also says, Ki hamakom asher ata omeid alav, because the place where you are standing on now is holy. Which one is it? Is it Al tikrov halom? Don't come any closer. Or is it Ki hamakom asher ata omeid alav, where you're standing now, which is considered to be Admas Kodesh? What is the Admas Kodesh? So we're not going to go through all the opinions. Right? We have the Ramban here, who says that the entire har where the sneh was kadosh, and therefore Moshe was already standing in Admas Kodesh. He's being told, don't come any further because you're already in Admas Kodesh. Right? That's the opinion of the Ramban. I quoted it for you in source number 20. There's another opinion offered by the Rishonim, which is that Ki hamakom asher ata omeid alav doesn't mean the land you are standing on is kadosh, but the land you are approaching is kadosh. Right? Alav doesn't mean where you currently are. Ki hamakom asher ata omeid alav is the place where you're about to stand is kadosh. But either way, we see the pasuk is a little bit clumsy. It's not so clear what Moshe is being warned to stay away from, what he's being warned not to come close to, or is he already in prohibition? So I want to focus on the position, on the opinion offered by Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch is source 21. I'm just going to read it. And just going to read the first line inside, and then I'm going to just explain the rest of it outside. His Hebrew is a little, it's not easy Hebrew. It says, Al tikrov halom, Ella, shal na'alecha mi'al raglecha, ki hamakom asher ata kavar omeid alav admas kodesh. The land where you are already standing is Admas Kodesh. Moshe Rabbeinu is already an Admas Kodesh. So this is what Rav Hirsch says. Rav Hirsch says, the ground upon which you are currently standing is holy. He says, instead of wondering, says, right, the Malach to Moshe Rabbeinu, instead of wondering about the phenomenal bush that's burning in front of you, I have your attention. You're focusing on the bush, right? Instead of wondering that bush that's beyond your sphere, that heavenly apparition that's in front of you, don't worry about that, Moshe is told. I want you to know that where you are currently standing is holy, says Rav Hirsch. Don't worry about those things which are beyond you. Are toha al tiva shel tofa, which are beyond your grasp, which are beyond your comprehension. Give yourself up entirely, says Rav Hirsch, this is what Moshe is being told, to the place where you are now. Ki hamakom asher ata omeid alav kodesh. Don't come further. Don't worry about what's in front of you. Worry about where you are now. You're already in a sanctified ground. So removing one's shoes, says Rav Hirsch, expresses one's complete devotion and investment into their current locale without any intermediary. Moshe Rabbeinu was told, take off your shoes now. Your mission begins now. It doesn't begin in a minute from now. Your mission has already begun from the moment you stepped foot on this mountain. Perhaps we can suggest the following explanation of the Psukim based on the approach of Rav Hirsch. Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu, Al tikrov halom, there's no need to come any closer. What's in front of you is awesome. It's frightening. It's paralyzing in its magnitude. It's something I know you've never seen before, Moshe Rabbeinu. But you don't need to approach any further to begin your tafkid. You don't have to grasp it in order to assume your position as a leader of the Manig of Klal Yisrael. Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha ki ha'makom asher ata omed alav admas kodeshu. Take off your shoes now. Your makom, where you are currently, is Admas Kodesh. You could start today. You don't have to have it all in order to begin Moshe Rabbeinu. Because this is the place. What makes this Admas Kodesh? Because this is the place where you will take off your shoes. This is the place where your tafkid begins. Why is it Admas Kodesh? Because this is the place where you will shal na'alecha me'al raglecha. This is where your holy mission begins, Moshe Rabbeinu. And this, perhaps, in our first approach, is the tshuva process. Right? We read a few weeks ago, Sefer Devarim, in source number 22. Ki ha-mitzvah hazos asher anochi mitzavcha yom l'nefleisa hi mimcha v'lo rechoka hi. Don't worry about what's in front of you. It seems awesome. It seems far, this tshuva. It seems impossible. It seems a task and a bridge too far to cross. Lo b'shemayim hi lemor mi ya'aleh lanu ha'shemayma v'kacheha lanu v'yashmeinu osav v'naseha. Lo me'ever layam hi lemor mi ya'aver lanu es ever hayam v'kachenu lanu v'yashmeinu osav v'nasena ki karov elecha hadavar hamod v'ficha v'vavcha la'asosa. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart. The tafkid begins now. It doesn't matter that it seems impossible and it seems enormous in its magnitude. That's not for you to worry about. Surrender yourself to today's challenge. It is only surmountable if you realize that it begins where you are instead of focusing on where you need to be. Like the Torah tells us by Yaakov when he's waiting to marry Rachel Imenu, kayamim achadim. Although the period was long, in Yaakov Avinu's eyes they were kayamim achadim. The task surely, had Yaakov envisioned it as a 7-year process to marry his beloved, would have seemed impossible. But the fact that the Torah calls it keyamim achadim, the Torah is telling us that if you take every day at a time, and you say and you bite off bite-sized chunks, it's not impossible. But this is not only about being paralyzed by what's in front of you. Perhaps Hashem is also telling Moshe, you must let go of what's been holding you back up until now, what's behind you. Rav Moshe Weinberger, the Mashpia of Yeshiva University, says, I heard in a beautiful shir that he gave on Pesach, he said, Na'alayim, shoes, indicate shi'ubud. Shi'ibud. Slavery, right? The fact that we are enslaved to something else. Na'alayim, says Rav Weinberger, quoting a Hasidic idea from the Haggadah Nevei Tzadikim. I couldn't find it. I looked for it in Hebrew books, but I couldn't. He says, Na'alayim come from the Lashon lin'ol, to lock up. Ni'ila is to lock in, to close in on something. For this reason, when you go to a Makam Kadosh, you have to unlock. You have to be willing to let go. We must prepare to unlock ourselves if we wish to approach Hashem. We must take off our restraints. We must take off our shoes and, so to speak, relax. We cannot rise in Kedusha, says Rav Weinberger, and be davuk to Hashem until we unfetter ourselves. This is what the pasuk is telling Moshe Rabbeinu. Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha. Take your na'alayim, take your na'olim, take your locks off your raglayim, which represents hergel, which represents your habit. You have to undo your habit. You have to unlock your potential. You have to allow yourself to spring forth if you want to experience holiness. That is what Moshe Rabbeinu was told. He quotes a story that the Chedushei Harim, Yitzchak Meir of Gur, was once riding in a carriage in Vienna. Now, he wasn't from Vienna, but he was riding in Vienna. And he quotes a story that there was once a wealthy Jew who was chasing after the carriage in search of a bracha. And the Jew was carrying an umbrella, and apparently it wasn't raining, but in those days that was a status symbol for someone to be holding an umbrella. You know, the rich people held umbrellas when they walked. And the man notices that the Chedushei Harim, the Ger Rebbe, is in the carriage, and he begins to run after the carriage. And he begins to run, and the Balagala wants to stop, and the Chedushei Harim says, go weiter, keep on going. And the man continues to run, and the Chedushei Harim says, go weiter, keep on going. Finally, the man of desperation just wants to catch up with the Rebbe, but he knows he can't get there. He drops his umbrella, and finally the Chedushei Harim is willing to give him a bracha. After the incident is over, the Baal HaGala says to him, why did you give him, what were you waiting for? He says, in order for him to get a bracha from me, he had to be willing to let go. Right? He was holding on to a status symbol. If you want to receive blessings, said the Chidushei HaRim, you have to be willing to let go a little bit. 2 years ago, I shared this idea with the students before Ataras Nadarim. I mentioned to the students that Nadarim and Ataras Nadarim play a very big role in what goes on this time period. We do Ataras Nadarim Erev Rosh Hashanah. We do Kol Nidre on the night of Yom Kippur, and it would seem as if this is the question that everybody asks now, a new question. It would seem that this obsession with Nadarim seems almost out of place, almost anticlimactic to what else we can be focusing on these days. So I mentioned to the students, I said, if you ever watch children play, and I noticed this with my children, and I've confirmed this with other people, children take on familiar roles. My children will play brother and sister, even though they already are brother and sister, right? They'll play, at best, mother and father, right? And if you think to yourself, you tell a child, you can be a dragon slayer, you can be a firefighter, you can be an astronaut, you can be anything in the world when you play with each other. Use your imagination, but they go back to what's comfortable for them. And for children, it makes sense because that's who they mimic, that's who they aspire to. Their imaginations, although they're vast, they also mimic their surroundings. So for children who have a vast imagination, we can understand why my son and daughter play brother and sister, even though that's what they are in real life. But what about everybody else, I said to the students? We go into the Yom Narayim thinking that our role is set. We sell ourselves short. To do teshuvah, we have to stop mimicking our surroundings. We have to stop saying, this is who I am and nothing more. This is who I've always been. This is what I'm going to be in the coming year. I've tried to change before. I have my role. I am the person who I am. I'm the lazy one. I'm the studious one. I'm the friend that nobody gets along with. I'm the person that always goofs off. Right? We have to let go. Ataras Nadarim is when we say to ourselves, my Nadarim, whether implicit or explicit, of who I said I am, who I promised to be in the past, doesn't have to be who I'm going to be. Sometimes what prevents us from doing teshuvah is the feeling of inevitability, that who we are has already been defined, either by others or more likely by ourselves. So the first approach to Nilas Asandal is you have to let go of our protections. You have to let go of our security. You have to be willing to dream, to imagine, to seek higher, and to seek better. I want to focus now on the Rambam. The Rambam said, Shaharei koshi haaretz magia l'raglov, that you have to feel the hardness of the ground. So let's go back to that pasuk. Vayomer al tikrav halom shal na'alecha mi'al reglecha ki hamakom asher ata omeid alav admas kodeshu. Shoes desensitize us. Shoes make us unaware of our surroundings. When you're wearing shoes, you can't feel what's underneath your foot. For better or for worse, when you're wearing shoes, you just don't feel what's underneath your foot. Moshe at this moment is being chosen as a leader, and therefore he must learn one of the most important lessons any leader can learn, which is sensitivity. You have to feel the koshi haraglov. You have to feel the hardness underneath your foot. You can't, Moshe is told. You shouldn't anesthetize yourselves, and we shouldn't anesthetize ourselves to the pain that exists around us. Nilas Hansandal on Yom Kippur also demands that we feel the koshi haaretz, that we feel the hardness of the ground. And there's a mashal they give of a child who comes running to a parent, and the child is holding in her hands a lifeless butterfly. And the child is distraught. There was a beautiful butterfly in the tree, and now the butterfly is lifeless in the child's hands, and the child runs to the parent. The child is sobbing that this butterfly, which once had so much vigor in life, is now deceased. And the parent says to the child, after the child catches its breath, the parent says to the child, what's going on? What happened? Why are you so upset? And the child says, I saw the butterfly, and it was struggling to get out of the cocoon. It was pushing to get out of the cocoon. And I felt bad for the butterfly. So I ripped the cocoon open and tried to help it out. And the parent takes the child in her arms, and the parent says to the child, the struggle was what made the butterfly stronger. It was pushing because it needed to push. You denied it the push. You denied it the pain. You denied it the resistance and the discomfort that it needed to grow. The butterfly wasn't ready to come out yet. Change is not often easy. Deprivation and a sense of longing are often a key component to change in teshuvah. However, teshuvah is a return not only to something, but from something. We must know what we are turning from and say the sources in 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. What's the problem with shoes? What's the problem with going into the Makom HaMikdash with the shoes, which according to at least the Gemara we quoted in source 26 is learned from Moshe Rabbeinu, although there are other sources as well. Says the Chizkuni, says the Baal HaTosfos, the Bechor Shor in source 27, that when you're wearing shoes, you don't realize there's a davar metunaf on your foot. You don't realize there's dirt on your foot. And you can't go into the Mikdash. You can't go into Yom Kippur if you don't realize that there's something on you that needs changing. If you're not only, do you have to know what you're going towards and be ready for the challenge, but you have to be aware of the fact that there's something that needs changing as well. And if you can't feel it, if you can't see it, if you don't know that it exists, then how do you expect to do teshuvah? The Rabbeinu Bachya says in source number 28, that's why it says, Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha. Says Rabbeinu Bachya, there are so many other words that the Torah could have used to define it, to take off your shoe. It could have said choletz, but why, or shlaf. But why in source 28 says Rabbeinu Bachya does it say, Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha? So he says that we see by Nevuah, when a Navi is told to take something off, the word shal, says Rabbeinu Bachya, I'll take his word for it. He says the word shal is used. What does shal mean? It comes milashon shlila, right? Shliliyot are isurim, things we have to stay away from. Shal means to negate. The Navi must disavow his physicality and preparation for Nevuah. Teshuvah too takes a measure of negating, of walking away, of holding back from something that we otherwise would want to do. And we're short on time, so I'm not really going to go into leather shoes now. But it's an interesting note to point out, is that leather is pointed out. We know the Gemara tells us in source number 29, what's the problem with leather? So this is a suggestion offered by many, is the Gemara tells us in source 29, as we know, the Birchos HaShachar that we make every morning, we're metaking when a person would get ready to go about their day. And what bracha would a person make after putting on their shoes? So the Gemara says, Kisayim misaneh, when a person puts on their shoes, Lema baruch sha'asalak likol sarki. A person should make the bracha of sha'asal likol sarki. That's what the bracha was originally metakin for putting on the shoes. And the question is, what does putting on leather shoes have to do with you, Hashem, sha'asal likol sarki, you give me all my needs? So it's quoted, the Sholem Eshiv quotes the Shlah, who quotes the Marshal, and it's quoted all over the place, that we know that the Bria, the creation, right, there's domain, there's an inanimate object, there's somech, which is plant form, there's chai, which are animals, and there's medaber, which is a human being. When a person wears leather shoes, they are in a sense taking all those things that God put on the earth, the inanimate object, which goes into the plant, and the plant which goes into the animal, and they're taking the animal and using it for their benefit. So Hashem, you gave me all of creation for my benefit. She'asali kol sarki. Everything you put in this world, I have the ability to take benefit of. And that's what it says. But says Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, again, I included it in the back of your source sheets from the Halichos Shlomo. It's not really very clear. I apologize, but you can look it up. Says Halichos Shlomo, that's true in general. But on Yom Kippur, we recognize our place. Yes, we are dominant. Yes, we are the top of the food chain. Yes, man and woman have their place, and they're supposed to take the world of Kivshu and to conquer it. But when it comes to Yom Kippur, when you realize you're standing in front of Hashem, and ultimately your fate is in His hands, it requires humility, says Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And so too with an Avel who comes to terms with his finality or the demise of a relative. You realize that life is not infinite. That although I have my place one day will be on the ground. And that is what Moshe Rabbeinu was told, Shal na'alecha me'agachi admas kodeshu. The Adama is holy, Moshe Rabbeinu. You are no longer the pinnacle, Moshe Rabbeinu was told. Even Adama, the domain, can become holy as well. So for the second to last, we're going to finish up now. We're told that leather represents this understanding, generally speaking, that everything in the world is given for me. But on Kippur, we have humility in recognizing our place, that in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, all of us really are just fleeting dust. And I want to conclude There's more to say about that, but I want to conclude with my final point. I want to talk about Ne'ilas HaSandal with hopefully less than 5 minutes, within its context of other Inuyim. So I'm sure you've noticed, I know I've noticed, I pointed this out to my wife, and I'm sure many of you in this room have noticed, that everything nowadays, from breakfast bars to bags of chips, have a story on them. You noticed this before? You cannot buy a food product that doesn't contain sometimes a blurb, but sometimes paragraphs, a story of where this product comes from, right? Here are some of the common elements if you want to construct the perfect story for the food you're eating and where it comes from, right? The recipe originated with a great-grandmother who lived in Europe. She made this for her family every Sunday night, right, religiously. And the recipe inevitably wasn't discovered till years later in a tin can or in an attic or in a shoebox somewhere, right? Or, power bars, right? The idea for this power bar came from an epiphany moment when this person was running and realized she needed or he needed more energy, right? The product, of course, was not made in a factory. It was first produced in the person's garage, right? We've seen these stories before, right? It was handmade then, and it's handmade now, right? As if anybody wants to buy a power bar made in someone's garage is handmade. I never met a person that wants that, but, right? It's still made in small batches where each bar is individually wrapped and probably kissed by its owner when it's put in the package, right? Right? We know that these products all have stories. It seems that everything has an origin story, right? I suppose that's better than the truth, which is that, this multinational company who ran years of market research and product testing, and then they went off to China where they have entirely inorganic materials going into vats the size of football fields, making this product, which then they ship over to you and your table, right? And this thing glows, it's so radioactive. So the true story is not as pleasant as the story that we like to read on the side of the cereal bar, which is that this was made by someone's grandmother in a garage. But be it as it may, everything now has a story. You can't, right? Even Tide, I don't know, detergent has stories about where it came from. So everything has a backstory. Sometimes I feel as if, presumably, because we assume everyone wants to know the backstory of the product that they're eating or they're enjoying or they're ingesting, we feel connected to the product. It makes us feel good about purchasing it. Everything and everyone has an origin story. But sometimes I feel as if everybody wants a backstory and an origin story, but our young people do not. I sometimes feel as if they view themselves as a link disconnected from the larger chain, not belonging as they do to an incredible heritage and the inheritors of an amazing destiny. Sometimes I feel as if, okay, I come from a great people, but that's not who I am, right? So I believe that it took place thousands of years ago, but where do I fit in? That's not my story, that's someone else's story. I'm not one of the people who are supposed to pass on that heritage. That's the job of somebody else. Perhaps Yom Kippur and the Inuyim on Yom Kippur are a response to this as well. It's in the back of your packet. There was a drasha given by Rabbi Lamb in 1958, and it was so prescient that it can be given today. He points out that the Gemara in source number 31 tells us, Ein li ela birchas hamazon birchas Torah minayin. We know that one is required to make a bracha on food. How do we know there's a mitzvah mid'oraisa to make a bracha on limud Torah? So Amar Rabbi Yishmael, he says it's a kal v'chomer. Al chayisha mevarich. You're going to make a bracha on chayisha, on food which comes in and goes out. Al chay olam haba kol shekain. Of course, you have to make a bracha on something like Torah, Dig olam haba. So I don't often like to read verbatim. I want to read you what he says, based on this, the definition of chay olam and chayisha. He says, with this our rabbis presented us with a distinction that governs all of life and which calls upon each of us to decide how we shall conduct our lives. For every activity in life can be regarded as either chayisha, which means life of the hour, that which must be done but which has no lasting significance, or chay olam, the life of eternity, that which may not seem pressing but which is of eternal and permanent significance. It is between life of the hour and life of eternity that the Jew must choose. And our rabbis leave us little doubt as to which they consider more valuable. Perhaps we can reduce, I love these terms, perhaps we can reduce those terms to two simpler English words, the urgent and the important. Chaye Sha'ah is the urgent. It includes all the matters which press us day in and day out, problems that have to be solved in a hurry within the hour, desires to be fulfilled, personal wishes to be satisfied. The life of the hour is the life of the urgent. Chaye Olam, however, is the important. Eternity is never in a hurry. There is no urgency about matters of the spirit. But ultimately, in the long view of man's life, they are what really counts. They are the important issues. The urgent matters pass within the hour. The important matters are Chai Olam. They last for eternity. The urgent requires us to make it fast. The important, to make it deep. It is urgent that a business person sometimes be clever, but it is important that they be wise. It is urgent that our children get good grades, but it is important they learn how to live. That's why they're in my class. One can hardly ask for a better teacher, with this we're going to finish, than Yom Kippur, in righting our imbalance, and impressing upon us the great importance of the importance of the Chai Olam. For Yom Kippur is a day of deprivation of Inui, when we deny ourselves 5 specific physical or material pleasures, indicating thereby that we can, if necessary, get along without Chaye Sha'ah, the mundane and worldly and urgent, but never without Chaye Olam. We can never get along without the spiritual. On Yom Kippur, we are forbidden to practice Nilat HaSandal, the wearing of comfortable shoes, teaching us that good clothing and fine possessions and comfort are all permissible, but they ought not to be the sum and substance of our lives. For they are only Chaye Sha'ah, and we can well do without them as we do on Yom Kippur. On this day, we feel the cold, hard ground and the ache of the feet. We can go a full day without Chaye Sha'ah, but not without Chaye Olam. We live not for the hour, but for eternity. Yom Kippur reminds us of eternity. And may we conclude with what we're going to say in Tefillah Zakeh this coming Friday night, and source number 32. May this Yom Kippur be a true kapara for all of us, for us and our families, and for all Klal Yisrael.